Hello, Jack. Gescheit?
Hello, Schuyler Thomas, and welcome to your show. Thanks for always being here to set this thing up, man. You're working the tech in the background. Much appreciated. Hi, everyone.
Thanks for the thumbnail. And you sent multiple thumbnails. We can get through them and how you were debating between them. But we're going to get to the core topic, which is what the thumbnail represents, soon. We're doing our warm-up routine as people come in. We'll start a little bit lighthearted. And I'm going to go dark real fast. All right, here. I got one bit of humor from The Onion. Oh, why can't it?
I saw it. We saw it. It was there. It was up twice. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, that's fine. Paramedics praise for being
layout where we're all equal. But
okay. Well, we're not all equal, are we? Paramedics praise for being too late to save Lindsey Graham. I like to say that the best things come in threes. You know, like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit for you. So one down. Lindsey was in a rush. He wanted to sneak ahead of good old Moscow Mitch to get his tongue way up the devil's keister, let's call it, for this show. So good bully for him. You know, he's an aggressive, feisty guy, Lindsey. Lady G, as we call him, as I was taught to call him by a friend. Poor guy.
It really is astonishing that congressmen just stay in there until like they're not able to even be wheeled in. I mean, and they're getting free health care while depriving Americans of health care. It's really kind of astonishing.
It's back in New York, we call it chutzpah. Gall, like, wow, you can really live with that. Good for you, good buddy. You're a different animal. It's as if you're not, I don't know, emotionally connected to other human beings or something.
Sociopaths, like ranchers.
Sociopath, that's the word, exactly. Or, you know, a lot of the tech billionaires, they do really well with machines, just not so good with the people, but that works well in our system. Good morning, Danielle. Thanks for joining.
Aloha.
From Baker Beach, if that's where you are.
Do you want to follow my attempt at humor up with your own?
Yes, in fact, I want to call this Jack's Comedy Corner, where Jack tries to get Schuyler Thomas, the sourpuss, who's got a lot of stuff to be pissed off about, get him to laugh. So watch, folks, and see whether we can get Schuyler to laugh. This is something I'd never seen before. There's a whole treasure trove of stuff from the serious, award-winning Onion News Network. So if you share the screen, and here we go.
Is that the right one?
That's it. That's it, kids. And I love that the casting is always amazing. The people they get to play the newscasters. This is like a Janine Pirro. Check her out.
President Obama announced today he will drastically scale back his agenda for America after a visit to a Denny's restaurant in Manassas, Virginia, caused him to, quote, completely reconsider what our nation is capable of achieving. In a press conference this afternoon, the president said, quote, what I saw at Denny's made me realize how much I have overestimated the American people. Before we return to leadership, we must first stop eating 6 sausages and a pound of eggs covered in syrup for breakfast, and we must stop leaving the house in sweatpants. For more, let's go to Onion News Network Washington correspondent Jane Carmichael, who is traveling with the president this morning.
Thanks, Andrea. The president stopped by the Denny's for breakfast en route to a speaking engagement and spent about 35 minutes inside. When he came out, he looked visibly shaken. I spoke to several Denny's customers and employees who witnessed the president's visit.
Well, I told him I had no job, and he asked where I've been looking for one. And I was like, what do I want to work for?
He said something to me about some colleges, something for my kids, but I could barely hear him with this little bitch cry his head off.
They microwaved his food until it was hot all the way through because, you know, he's the president.
Several people noted that Obama looked, quote, real uneasy throughout much of the meal, particularly when he saw a drunk man who was sleeping in a nearby booth sit up and vomit on his chocolate chip pancakes and immediately go back to sleep.
Thanks, Jane. And we have White House Deputy Press Secretary Todd Grant joining us right now. Mr. Grant, give us a sense of how big these post-Denny's policy changes will be.
Well, Andrea, the president was deeply unsettled by his experience at Denny's, so it's safe to say the changes will be sweeping. They're all laid out in his new realistic hope for America plan.
Right, I can
and it
see that.
basically replaces the president's previous agenda with goals he now thinks are more within the grasp of the American public, such as not slapping your children in public, not calling your waitress a cunt, and not smoking while eating your moons over my hammy.
Now, surely he's going to face strong criticism for abandoning his previous plans, for example, on the environment.
Andrea, I was with the president when he went inside the Denny's. Those plans were never going to happen.
Really?
But the president hasn't abandoned his principles. It's true that he's no longer calling for 1 million hybrid cars by 2015.
Right, I can see
but he
that.
is calling on Americans to think about walking to the liquor store down the block instead of driving. We believe America can do it. And we're also encouraging Americans to quit meth and stop getting Tweety Bird tattoos.
So big picture, Mr. Grant, what does this mean for the long-term goals of the Obama presidency?
Well, it's certainly not to make America a world leader in anything anymore.
Interesting.
But we hope to inspire all of America to band together and make our nation a little bit less of an embarrassing, disgusting shithole.
Okay, well, that makes sense. Mr. Grant, thank you so much for being with us.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. This is 20 years ago, the beginning of the American idiocracy, which is risen to new spectacular heights. You know,
we could make fun of ourselves back then because we actually still had the idea of having expectations. We are what that was joking about times 10 now. In fact, I go so far as to say that Denny's is like the official meeting place of MAGA when they go to still bitch about Obama for what Trump is doing.
I prefer IHOP myself. I think their pancakes are fluffier.
Why? Damn liberal. Liberal in your IHOPs.
Liberal, exactly. With your non-whole wheat pancakes and you probably want Vermont maple syrup, rather than just good old Aunt Jemima.
We got more news. I'll throw up another bit of recent news.
I'm sorry, what are you going to throw up?
Tonight, an eyewitness sharing new details about the lead up to this terrifying moment. A Yellowstone bison charging a 65-year-old man and his grandson, flipping the man into the air.
I was scared to be watching something like that happen firsthand.
Emmy Lou Abrahamson says moments before, the agitated animal had settled onto the ground near their campsite.
This bison is pissed off.
The two take pictures, then the bison begins rolling in the dust before getting up and seeming to target this truck. A rapid charge. Both tried to run and hide, with the bison chasing the man around a group of trees, stopping to trash one around before it catches up. The massive animal tossing the man several feet.
It was terrifying. When the bison jumped up, it looked like it ran after the man and the kid, and we could see the bushes shaking.
The man's family says he underwent surgery and is on the mend, telling us the grandson is also okay. Photographer Mike McLeod captured the animal's powerful charge.
It was like watching.
Okay, I don't want to hear from more of these people. That was somehow I downloaded a longer version of that. Clicked the wrong link, but I'm guessing that this animal is dead by now. Killed.
I'm not sure. George, who lives near Yellowstone and knows it real well, or even Jim Cota for that matter, would know what the deal is with this stuff. I mean, I was actually. This is kind of lighting up the internet right now. It's been on a lot of different feeds. And one I saw actually gave me a little bit of hope, which was, it was overwhelmingly the comments were, it's the dumb human's fault, that kind of stuff. And some of them were very clever, but it was basically not blaming the animal. And then there was shot after shot after shot, or clip after clip of people, or pictures and video of people, trying to go up and feed the bison because people don't know. They're that out of touch with nature, as we've talked about before. So it may not be the case where a bear comes into a campsite in Yosemite and messes with somebody, and then they have to hunt down that bear, because this is people all over going up these animals in Yellowstone, right?
Yeah. And I noticed that this video was heavily edited. It's like they took out the sections in between before the bison caught up to the guy. Like, did they remove the stupid activity that was taking place? Well,
I did not know. Yeah, I mean, by surviving, he's now guaranteed to have those end years in the United States of America where your entire savings is drained as you're attached to machines as our health. I just hope he's the kind of person. I'm hoping that he's the kind of person that would speak publicly and say, "Hey, that was my fault. Please leave that animal alone." And I hope this is a warning to other people not to approach these animals, that they're you know, they're wild animals. You don't know what they're going to do. Oh, this was, I believe, did you hear that bit? It was also, if I heard correctly, which would make sense based on that behavior, it was it's the peak of the rutting season when this happened.
Well, I was guessing that people would blame the bison because he's in the campground.
Hey, do we have, I see a ceiling fan and a light bulb. And
George turned his camera on. I don't know when he intends to join, but if he's
George,
you're here.
Folks, for those who don't know, this is George Werthner. He doesn't know. I've never actually seen you face to face on, well, video, let alone in person, sir. And just to make you embarrassed, you're one of my heroes. Seriously.
Well, thank you. All right.
Yeah. I mean, I can't keep up. All I can do is read your research papers and then do what I do, which is kind of communications and advertising hijinks, like the stuff we were just showing where we joke around, and you're a more serious fellow. To your credit, I've got your wildfire compendium, the wildfire reader right over there on my bookshelf. That was when I first found out all the research you did, and you were teaching me about the U.S. Forest Service being a proxy for the industry, and just so much stuff from, 15, 20 years ago, before I became a vegan activist and before the animal stuff. And so, pleasure to meet you. Thanks, Skyward, for arranging this.
Yeah, well, I appreciate what you guys do too. Of course, it's getting the word out is the ultimate thing to the public so that they understand these issues.
Well, it's both. We need someone to do the research and then people to, be loudspeakers in effect.
Right.
It's both.
Right.
Yeah. And boy, the amount of news that you're putting out, we're not going to spend 10 minutes kissing your ass, but he is doing great work. People should read it.
Well, it's 3 minutes of thanking somebody for his service, and a real environmentalist in the flavor of Ed Abbey, I believe, since I think you were a follower of his as well. Yeah, you really care deeply about the natural world and wild animals, and it's just you're an elder now, whether you want to be or not, buddy. So you're going to get some of the appreciation of us kids.
I'm getting the silver hair.
Yes.
George, Jack's main topic that he chose for today was to go through what you wrote about the Sierra Club, embracing what Jack has termed red washing. And we know that you're not afraid to tell the truth, so you're a great guest. I didn't expect you to call in, but that's magnificent. And I had shown, because the bison is in the news, that bison in Yellowstone, and I was going to speculate. There's now a great way to deal with this bison, and we can just call in the Native Americans and consider killing it part of traditional hunting, because it's about as traditional as the footage that I've seen coming out of Yellowstone. And warning to everybody, I'm going to put up something troubling right now, because this is footage from Yellowstone voices who are fighting for these bison. I was even going to go so far, I don't think this is actually true, but just to be a smartass, say that the bison had nowhere left to go except for into that campground after he was driven from what little remains of Yellowstone that hasn't been taken by ranchers and Native American hunting. This looks more like the scene where we're all supposed to feel mad at the white man during Dances with Wolves, with the ridiculous number of carcasses left behind. But this is footage of the bison slaughter that takes place via traditional Native American hunting with gigantic pickup trucks and state-of-the-art weapons. Some pretty astonishing stuff.
May I comment at this point? Yeah, I've been to these to Yellowstone numerous times, including when these so-called hunts were occurring. A number of things people need to understand. The bison's main ecological strategy for millions of years has been mobility. In other words, moving in response to drought, deep snow, predators, whatever. And one of the problems here is that in winters, when there's significant snow in Yellowstone, they operate that age-old ecological response, which is to move. And what's happening, and what's tragic about what you're seeing right here, is that the bison that are most likely to migrate are the ones that are getting slaughtered. So we're slowly maybe not so slowly, changing the genetic makeup of the bison herd in Yellowstone, which is the least domesticated herd in the West. In other words, almost everything else you hear about, quote, wild bison being in different state parks and other on ranches or tribal lands, and none of them are wild in the true sense, because they're fenced in, they're inoculated, they're fed in the wintertime, predators are prevented from killing them, and so forth. So the natural ecological ability to respond to these things is eliminated, but not so in Yellowstone. However, when they leave Yellowstone National Park these days, they are killed at the border. This is just less than a mile from Yellowstone's border where these pictures are taken, as they come out, mostly by tribal groups. And they claim they are operating under treaties that existed in the past. However, and this, I'm going to go into sort of the weeds here. I've read all the treaties, and none of the treaties actually, in my view, give them the right to hunt in this particular area. And this is a little bit of the nuance. When treaties were signed back in the 1860s, mostly, they tribes retained the right to hunt outside the border of their reservations on unclaimed land, which has been determined to be Forest Service or other public lands, within the boundaries of their former territories. And these are defined legally in the treaties. And there's no legal treaty rights to this particular area where this hunting occurs. So that's part of the problem. The other is the tribes say that they're trying to, they want to protect wild bison. At the same time, they're killing hundreds, sometimes well over 1,000 animals a year. And the problem with that is the Yellowstone herd went through a big bottleneck meaning that it was a very small breeding population that was saved. And that when they were first protected in Yellowstone. And now every so often, the population can be trimmed again by the hunting and other, including they also capture and slaughter them. A couple of years ago, it was like 40% of the population, I believe, was eliminated. So that puts a genetic bottleneck, and and it's even worse for bison than for other animals, because bison are what are called tournament breeders. So what we mean by that is one bull might impregnate 20 cows, and so the actual genetic diversity in the population is much smaller, the effective population diversity, than would be if it were just a typical 50-50 ratio in breeding. Anyway, this has other effects on the ecosystem. For example, wolves and bears and wolverine and ravens and all eagles, they all depend on being able to kill bison or find carrion. Well, if you reduce 40% of the population, you've reduced the competition, so that death from other processes, in other words, like say a harsh winter or predators, is eliminated from that population, and therefore there's less carrion, there's less dead bison. For a grizzly coming out of hibernation in March in Yellowstone or April with cubs doesn't have much to eat, but they find one dead bison carcass, that's like winning the lottery for that mother with cubs. So you're eliminating that excess bison that would otherwise go to feed animals in the ecosystem. And then you're also affecting the genetics, as I mentioned, and the ecological processes of bison have on plant communities, etc. And so it's to me, it's really disingenuous for the tribes to say they're trying to protect and want to support wild bison at the same time that they're killing hundreds or thousands of them every year. And it just, whether they have treaties or not, they're not being honest in terms of their articulating how they can protect it. If they were genuinely wanting to protect wild bison, they'd be supporting expanding Yellowstone Park. They'd be supporting expansion of bison on public lands, national forest lands adjacent to the park with no hunting zones. And they're not doing that. So it's hypocritical.
Shout out to Yellowstone Voices. If people want to go over there and support them, that's where this footage is from. And that was the clip before was a baby bison wandering around because the mother had been slaughtered as a part of this hunt, and the baby was left without mentorship. And then the last clips are showing that once the bison realize that they're being trapped, they aren't allowed to go back into Yellowstone, so they're just forced into a pretty ugly slaughter. George and I already did this topic. We did it thoroughly. For this, I'm going to be the bad guy and force us to keep moving on, but we did do one about basically wild bison being turned into domesticated bison, zoo animals, eventually via this process. But it is related to this blind embrace of attaching. It's using, I know we realize that we sound like we're attacking Native Americans, but really we're attacking the sudden embrace of people to get on board with continuing to hurt nature when Native American culture is attached to it. And we're not so sure Native American culture is actually being respectfully used in the traditional manner, as Jack's excellent thumbnails indicate. You know, I'll put your other one up too. We're going to move into George's article about forest management, not bison management anymore, but now forest management. And Jack, this is your topic and George's expertise. But Jack, as I continue to show your thumbnails and prepare your slideshow, go ahead and introduce the topic and why it inspired you today.
Yeah, thank you, Skylar. And it's really, I mean, I'm just aware we're kind of making a document here, and we're three middle-aged white guys, silver-haired, except for Skylar, who's so young. And we're going to be throwing in some criticism of Native American practices from some Native Americans. And as I was taught by Kenneth Brower, whose work I very deeply respect as well, who described George Werthner here as an editorial machine for his incredible output of compelling articles and really thorough research. Oh, by the way, can you put George's, do you have control, Skylar? Can you name George? It just says Geo. I'd love to put George Werthner there so people know who this is, because some people will not, you know, from younger than us, who like, who's George Werthner? Who's this guy?
I'll see if I can. I think guess name themselves.
Or George can, but I just want to give the context for where we're going to go. So it's the third rail of environmental politics. You cannot say bad things or denigrate the Native American, because the Native American, fairly so, has had, you know, their culture destroyed and their land taken from them. And they are, of course, still alive and thriving culture today. But it's not one monolithic thing, just like we as three middle-aged white guys aren't one monolithic thing. And that framing is key for the inevitable attacks we're going to get for daring to criticize any tribal behavior, any one tribe, slaughtering bison with high-powered rifles from the back of pickup trucks like no Native American ever did hundreds of years ago. And then to segue over to where we're going to go, traditional ecological knowledge, so-called TEK, is why I coined the term intentionally abrasive redwashing. It's not meant to be offensive to Native Americans. It's designed to get attention to the issue, which is white man, our culture, European culture, saying, well, we're just doing what the Native Americans did with whatever the topic. In the case of forest management, as it's called, it's really an exchange of exploitation. Some Native Americans, not all, certainly have tremendous ecological knowledge, no question. They come from a long line of people more connected to the land than the Europeans who came here. And I want George's input on this when I stop my little opening salvo here. But many are, you know, my crazy theory, remember this in the midst of this controversy, People are people, regardless of their skin color. Some are honest and true and beautiful people trying to do good in the world, and some are going to take the money, which is tempting in this capitalist culture, whoever you are, where you come from. If we can make a deal with this tribe to do these nasty things like use chainsaws as depicted in this picture here, and in the case of a lawsuit I'm involved with at Tamaulipas Bay State Park, one specific forest, and pretty much everywhere with the work of Chad Hansen, U.S. government agencies, the white man, I'll call him simplistically, says, well, the Native Americans did this. They tended the forest with whatever small extent that they were tending the forest and extracting their resources for a small population. They then go on to extrapolate that giving chainsaws to workers, whether they're Native American or not, is tending the forest. And that's the nonsense part of it, where it becomes a complete exploitation that I call redwashing, because the Native Americans did a little something. We're going to use herbicides and chippers and masticators and thin the forest because that's the way the Native Americans did it, which is utter non-science. So I obviously could go on, as each of us can, but I just wanted to frame the bigger picture here, and then we can get into the details. And one thorough article that George wrote, I didn't know George would be here, so I'm sort of torn between reading his words off the screen and having the frickin' guy sitting here in the chair if I just shut up and let him talk.
Well, why don't you read a few words and tell us why you chose those words, and then George can elaborate on them. I'll say really quick, I didn't understand this thumbnail until you just now said it. And I did the same thing except with scientists. I was like, well, scientists are people too. Unfortunately, everybody is affected in this day and age by funding situations. So no matter what their ethnicity or what their scientific background, they're compromisable.
Yes, exactly. And, no better, no worse. No better, no worse. And do Indians generally, Native Americans, have more ecological knowledge than some Europeans these days? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean it's... So this is the Wildlife News publication that George... George, what exactly is your connection to the Wildlife News? You're a contributor or a co-founder, or it's yours, or what?
I'm just a contributor. I don't run it, but I'm allowed to post things to it. So I've been doing this for probably 15 years now. And it was originally started by a guy named Ralph Mon at the Idaho State University in Pocatello, who was concerned about wildlife. That's why the name Wildlife News. And it's been broadened now to discuss any public lands issues in general.
Okay, so if the audience members... The Wildlife News, go there and subscribe. I believe it's free. I'm pretty sure I'm not paying for it. Yeah, and you should give them $5, or $10 or $20 or $50, but please subscribe. It's really a great publication, and you can see it's the opposite of CNN, which is fancy production with low content. This thing is dense with content, not just from George, and it's free and simply produced, and it's got a lot of heart and a lot of knowledge and a lot of scientific knowledge. So this article is by George. It's a new one, July 7th, as you see here. Sierra Club perpetuates Indian management myth. And because we don't have a ton of time, and I got the man here, I'm not going to go in depth as I wanted to. That's George's purview. Mine is the overview. So he talks about, George does, the Pine Barrens and flawed narrative common among nearly all members of the media and numerous conservation groups regarding wildfires and native peoples. So we're going to get into that for sure. And again, I don't want to get into the details of the Pine Barrens here. I really want to just first do the overview. So I'm scrolling down through this thorough, but for George, short article, because he's a thorough dude. And it's kind of here where I wanted to talk. Bear with me here. So
Jack, let me just throw this up really quick. Also out of the Wildlife News, just brand new. Forest Service moves to reduce public oversight and public comments on its policies. I mean, Jesus.
Well, there's an all-out assault now. I mean, there always has been by industry, and George has more perspective on this over the years. But under the Trump administration, who is anti-environmentalist and pro-government, pro-big business. He's anti-government, pro-big business. It's going to get a lot worse, and the midterms are important and all that. And even I've noticed, George, if I may, since I got you here, you don't usually do political stuff, but I see you sort of like this decent man, like a Robert Reich. Former Secretary of Labor under the Clinton administration, like you're so pissed off you can't keep your mouth shut about politics anymore because it's so bad. Am I right?
To a degree, yes. I try not to antagonize anybody who might be sympathetic, just because they happen to be some other political persuasion. If they can have their minds opened up to a different perspective, I'm happy to do that, and I don't want to alienate them unnecessarily. Although there are certain, I wrote a thing yesterday about livestock grazing on public lands, which I called vandalism, which is obviously hyperbole meant to change the way we think about these things, and I do it on purpose.
Wait a sec. Let me get you straight here. You're saying that your use of the word vandalism to describe livestock on private land is hyperbole?
Public lands.
Why do you think that that's hyperbole? I think that's understating it. Seriously.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to say something that's provocative to change the whole way that we look at the issue. That's the point. And get people to think about it in a different way instead of, oh, they're out there caring for the land. And isn't it great to see the cows all over the place? And they're fixing the land and keeping it healthy and all the other stuff that you hear. And it's and I can make a case that the cows do incredible amount of damage. Even quote, the best ranchers, those who are most conscientious, can't avoid a lot of impacts, and particularly, and this is true on private lands as well. So, but the public lands is where we have a say over what happens, and that's why I focus on the public lands.
Indeed. Skyler, would you say cattle ranching is vandalism of public lands? Would you think that's hyperbole, my friend?
It's more damaging than vandalism.
Exactly. No, George,
vandalism can be topical. Vandalism can just like make it unpretty. Cattle grazing undoes a working system and prevents a working system from coming back. Now, if they would just embrace that, they're saying fuck nature because we want our industry that we've romanticized, and this is why George has to like tiptoe or sometimes be daring about messing with people's perceptions, because we've all been raised to think that it's so wonderful people are out there raising cattle. But the bottom line is that the more cattle that are there, the less habitat there is, the less wildlife there is. But they simultaneously tried to also promote that they are in fact promoting nature and promoting wildlife. And it's complete bullshit. I mean, it's complete bullshit. It's so bad, as George has pointed out to me years ago, it's so bad that you will find more diversity in urban settings than ranching rural settings in a lot of cases. That's how bad they are for nature.
And I agree with you. Go ahead, George.
I was just going to give an example where people don't think about it. Like around the West in general, you'll see millions of acres in irrigated pasture lands, which are planted to plants like alfalfa, exotic, non-native species, over millions of acres, using the majority of the water in the West to grow feed for livestock. And I've been out, I used to teach ecology classes for colleges, and I'd have the students out there, and we'd be driving past these fields, and they think it was so beautiful. Look at this green pasture out here. And not realize that was a biological desert. It's only got a few species of plants, more than, it might only have one, but at most a few species of plants, and covering a huge amount of acreage. And then we'd go by, a couple of houses or something with their landscaping around, and I'd point to them, well, that house has more wildlife habitat and the shrubs and the trees around it than this, 1,000-acre pasture full of alfalfa. And, I was hoping that, at least I think it did with some of the students, really opened their eyes to think about it differently, particularly when you look at the ratio of this stuff, wheat fields over millions of acres, alfalfa fields and so forth. So agriculture is the biggest impact of the landscape in the United States by far. And in my view, obviously we have to produce some food, but we should eliminate food production on marginal lands like the arid West, which makes no sense to be growing cows in at all. I don't think it makes sense to grow cows anywhere, actually. But even growing other crops in other parts of the country, we should be trying to do as little of that as possible in order to, feed the country, not continuously try to prop up production.
Let me shout out a viewer. We've had a lot of comments on here, but I'm blowing past them. But NC says Lake Powell is drained by cows. Mead is next. And I wanted to add a point to what George is saying. They're looking at the fields, and the fields of commodity plants are void of biodiversity, or at least largely void of biodiversity. But there's also the destruction of habitat. The entire path that that water system used to feed and has now been drained. Like miles and miles and miles away, animals are dying, plants are dying, because the stream that used to run through there and provide vital water and nutrients, that's also been sucked dry to grow these plants over here that exist only for the ranching industry.
Right. Can I get back to the Indian thing though quickly? I want to make a couple of points. One,
hang on a sec, George. I'm going to interrupt. Sorry, I'm just going to play host here and force myself on you. So I want to say a couple things, and then we're going to get an Indian topic, and you're going to say what you're going to say. But before you dive into another chunk here, there's someone who just wrote, "Hello, it's my first time in this channel. I'm not even from America, but this sounds really interesting." Exactly. So I'm keenly aware we have the honor of your company here. Do you know how to type your name, George Werthner, into your tag there so people know who you are, so you're identified? And while you're playing with that for a moment, you're a surprise guest, so we would have done it for you before you arrived. For the audience who doesn't know who this man is, George Werthner's, I'm going to read just an incredibly truncated bio. An ecologist who's authored almost 38 books. That's more books than I've read in my life. On American landscapes, yes, I'm kidding, wildfire and wilderness areas, been studying predators for 4 decades, more than older than some of our audience members here. Particularly, he's involved in wolf restoration efforts in Montana. He's lived near Yellowstone National Park, where he's a licensed guide, and so much more. I'm just checking out the titles he's written: Welfare Ranching, The Subsidized Destruction of the American West, Wildfire, A Century of Failed Forest Policy. And that's the one I got, which turned me on to how wildfires, I mean, this is 20 years ago, are natural, normal, and necessary. And we may want to prevent wildfires from going out of control and destroying our homes, but we don't need to cut down forests to prevent them, and on and on and on. So it's just a taste of this guy's experience. George Werthner with us. Did you get your, could you remove the comment, Skylar, if you're still around? Anyway, I just want to give you your due, sir, so people know to pay attention and like, oh, this is interesting. Yeah, no shit. This is, these conversations don't happen. Please like and subscribe to this channel, to the Skyjack podcast on Skylar's YouTube platform and My Tree Spirit Project, to George Werthner's Wildlife News. This is called housekeeping, George, in the world of Zoom webinars, because the algorithms don't grab our content and push it out because it's not the usual slop. It's actually thoughtful, and we could do hours with you. Having said that, turn it back to you and say whatever you want to say, including about Native Americans and what I call redwashing, but take it.
Okay, a couple of things to point out. Historically, the impact in most cases of tribal people, this is around the whole world, including our ancestors from Europe, had minimal impacts on a lot of these natural ecosystems because of low population density and low technology. And if you change either one of those things, you get greater impacts. And just to give one example, that
hold on, I'm going to interrupt you again. I'm sorry, sir. That's just so freaking important. I'm just doing the Ari Melber, emphasize what our esteemed guest just said, which is low population numbers of Native Americans hundreds of years ago, or as we all know, time immemorial, was not 340 million Native Americans in this continent. And then also,
and if one changed, if only one changed,
and the other element is
both have changed.
The other element is pre-industrial revolution. The other element. So, Skylar, you want to repeat your comment? I didn't mean to cut you off, sir.
I said, and he said, if one of those things changed, it would be significant. Both of them have changed.
Yeah,
anyway,
and
really got to
so
cutting them off.
if you give an example, I've written and studied bison for a long time. We were talking about bison before. Unbeknownst to most people, the introduction of the horse, which was like a new technology, enabled tribal people to have a much greater, widely spreading net to capture bison, kill them, and to kill more at a time. When you were just going out on foot with a spear, you could just, you were lucky if you could kill, maybe a dozen bison at a time. On horses, there's lots of documented examples where they killed 1,000 or 2,000 in a day. And in fact, by the 1850s and 60s, bison herds had shrunk to about half of the area they occupied on the Great Plains. And this is before the commercial white hunting that started after the Civil War kicked in. So that technology and so forth, did two things. It allowed them to be able to kill more bison, and this is an interesting thing. It actually increased population to a degree because they were better fed. So we had more people hunting for bison, and the bison became a mechanism of trade that is enabled, and this is an irony, enabled tribal, they would trade the hides at trading posts to get ammunition and guns to both kill more bison as well as kill each other in the territorial warfare that occurred over who got what territory that had the best hunting. So it's an example of how one thing, introduction of the horse, changed the whole demographics and the hunting efficiency of tribal people. And I would say that the second point is today, to make your point, is the exploitation of the natural resources is far more common than you might think. When I see tribal people being opposed to some sort of damage, let's say opposing dams on rivers or something like that, that's great. However, where they can get money from the dams, you find that they don't oppose the dams. In other words, follow the money. And a good example is oil and gas exploration in Alaska, where the tribal, the Eskimos that live along the coast are very supportive of oil and gas in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge and other parts of the North Slope. And that's because they get a significant amount of money in way of royalties, millions and millions of dollars a year from oil exploration. And some of them also have oil equipment companies and services and so forth. So you have to look at, who's benefiting financially from some position, and then and see if there isn't some way that explains it, because I found in most cases it does. And again, I always say, I don't blame those people living up in those coastal villages. They're not rich and things are expensive, and this is an opportunity for many of them. I would do the same thing to live a better lifestyle. They want cell phones just like in computers, and they want to be able to buy, food and so forth. And this is a way to do it. However, you got to realize that this can happen, and not sort of romanticize the idea that somehow they're going to be free of that kind of temptation.
Exactly. People are people, or as Danielle writes in our comment, money corrupts. So let's get into the meat of it, the vegan, the mushroom of it here. Sorry, it's my old habit from my father. He used to say, get to the meat of it. And he would say, well, really the blubber of it. We're 40 minutes in or 43 minutes in. So thank you, Skylar. You're a good man working the tech there. So this is from this article in the Wildlife News by George Werthner that just published a week ago. And here's the part that's going to get us into the controversy, but fine, let's do it. So I'm reading right here, first paragraph. First, there is a growing movement to promote so-called traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK as it's known in our circles, which is largely based on the idea that native people have specialized understanding of how natural systems work and sustain landscapes. The inference is that modern science, which now recognizes the role of wildfire in ecosystems, is only just beginning to learn what tribal people have known since, quote unquote, time immemorial, a phrase I hear ad nauseum. In other words, Western science is only now learning what the wise Indians knew all along. You cannot leave nature alone. It will become an ecological mess. And that, my friends, that paragraph, we could discuss that for 2 hours. That is deep, and it points in so many different directions because, I mean, there's more to say there. That's not the end-all be-all to it. Because I think, just to balance this out with the three of us kind of on one side of this issue, I think that tribal peoples did have deep information and a connection to the land that most European culture did not have, or had, but you have to go back thousands of years, back to the roots when we're all people on the land. But the way Western civilization developed, and this is the Tucker Carlson philosophy that, the West only contributed good things and everything else is horrific and did nothing, and ignorant savages. Well, of course, that's insane.
That sentence is astonishingly disgusting. I don't believe
which
the end of that sentence, that nature is a mess without human management. I don't believe that Native Americans ever concluded that back in history. I don't believe they ever went out into the forest, no matter what they were doing, and concluded, without us, this would be a disaster.
I totally agree with you. And actually, let's put our faces up and see what George has to say about what we're dipping into the pool here, because this is really important conversation. Because even just reading that, I know is going to get some of my environmentalist friends who really worship the Native American for their wisdom are just like so pissed off now at the three white guys. And I'm speaking with that in mind, prepared for the criticism, for the blowback. You know, George?
What I would say is that the implied message is that we need to garden the planet, and that the planet cannot survive without human intervention. And think of how absurd that is. I'll use the example of North America because it's clear when people arrived here, 15, 20,000 years ago, depending upon whose research you use. The point being is most of these plant communities existed for millions of years without any human intervention. And now we're told we have to go in and set fires to keep them healthy. We need the log to keep them healthy. And this is all and this is coming from a lot of Native Americans too, saying this. And yet they did set fires. Yes. They set fires, and the research shows that most of that impact was very localized. It did not greatly influence large landscapes. And it's mostly climate, for example, that affects when and where you have your fires. And so the implied message is, because they had an influence on a small area, that is extrapolated to entire ecosystems is not accurate. And
beautiful. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, my friend. Yeah. I want to do this for our format here. Skyler, can you give me the screen again? I just want to illustrate what George just said. And I found a clip. We're going to pick on one guy who's probably a wonderful man. That's not the point. It's the content we want to get at here.
By 1970, the National Park Service realized their mistake. Without small fires to open up pine cones and make room for new growth, there were no new sequoias. So they shifted course. But you can't fully shift course without the knowledge of native tribes, who have managed the land for generations.
Indigenous people yet have been excluded from many of these conversations led by state, federal agencies, and sometimes private companies that are large landowners.
Agencies are beginning to do more prescribed fires, but these are different from the cultural burns developed by native tribes. Prescribed burns are used primarily to just get rid of the plant debris that feeds a wildfire.
Your primary focus is, I'm burning for acreage and I'm burning to reduce fuel load. Well, that's exactly what you do. But then your land is not restored.
Cultural burning, on the other hand, is part of a longer-term engagement between native people and the land. For example, after a burn, the ashes are raked into the soil to encourage plant regrowth. If the goal is restoration, the entire process looks different. You don't just burn and leave. That's why Beth Rose takes her classes out to learn from Ron, so they can see firsthand his caretaking process.
Yep.
If you play it for too long, we'll have to cut it out. But you made me watch this on a previous episode. I can't stomach this shit twice.
so let's, okay, fine. So that's an insult. Let's get into it. So again, it's what you want to put George back on the screen here. We don't need to see this picture. Thank you, sir. So this is the point. It's just what George said. And I actually want George, more academically, what perhaps is our speculation as what went on in Yosemite Valley with native peoples, where they did maybe work the valley floor and control nature and groom and garden nature to get food and clothing and hunt and all, but they weren't in the backcountry on millions of acres, which now the National Park Service and the Forest Service and locally here, California State Parks and CAL FIRE all use this party line. It's become a freaking party line, which is the Native Americans tend to the land. We're going to consult with them and then bring in our drip torches, with fossil fuels sprayed on the ground, burn the stuff and use machine tools.
Well, that's exactly the point. Yosemite Valley is a good example. You can show that there was additive fire from human occupation in the valley. But on Yosemite Park as a whole, as well as the whole Sierra ecosystem as a whole, that was a small imprint here and there, mostly localized around the villages. And yet some want to extrapolate, like I said, to the larger landscape. And there's no evidence for that. And we have evolutionary evidence for this. I'll use another example. Sagebrush is one of the most common ecosystems across the West. Millions of acres are covered with sagebrush, and it tends to be at lower elevations. It goes up higher, but it's in the places where people live most of the year, okay? And in the people that occupy parts of Nevada and Wyoming and Montana and in Colorado, where sagebrush is abundant at lower elevations. And yet sagebrush has no adaptations to fire. If you had fire frequently, you lose sagebrush. Well, if you lost, if they were burning frequent, as some suggest, you wouldn't have sagebrush, and you wouldn't have sage grouse, you wouldn't have sage thrashers, you wouldn't have pygmy rabbits. We wouldn't have all these animals that live in the sagebrush ecosystem if burning was that frequent. So that's evolutionary evidence to suggest that burning was localized, didn't affect large landscapes. The same thing in chaparral. Chaparral is the largest ecosystem as a plant community in California. And chaparral can burn, but not frequently. If you burn it frequently, it gets replaced by, you know, wild oats and other weedy grass species instead. And so it's another example of where if burning were as frequent as suggested, it wouldn't occur. And then this thing that the movie just showed was about sequoias, and the evidence shows that sequoias need high severity fires in order to regenerate, not low severity fires. And so, and that's this, you know, the other interesting thing about my article, I'll just mention it right now, is that the evidence suggests that, you know, so this gets to what landscape are you getting back to with the pine barrens in New England? The evidence shows that after European settlement, fires increased in that. And so they're using that, you know, people, you know, colonists have been there for 400 years. So most of these fire scar studies don't go back, you know, 400 years or more. And so they're using the fire scar studies and say, well, fires were more frequent in these pine barrens. And so that's why we have to burn them more often, with Native Americans saying, yes, that's true, when in fact their influence on the pine barrens was almost negligible in the past, before the European colonization. So we have a lot of these situations where there's misinformation being used to justify tending the planet, and it's a real threat, in my view, to the whole concept of wilderness and parks as preserves. Because two things I will say right here: we need to minimize human input someplace, and imprint someplace, and that's what wilderness and parks do. And secondly, in the past, again, with low population density and so forth, the influence of people on North America and a lot of these ecosystems was relatively minor in a sense. Although there's, you know, I mean, people can point to things like the loss of Pleistocene large mammals like woolly mammoth and so forth, where human hunting might have even had an impact on their ultimate extinction, although climate change was still probably the biggest factor there. Nevertheless, the point is that low population density, low technology limits what you can do. And so to the degree that the impact and influence of these people was pretty marginal, and certainly a lot of these ecosystems existed before humans were around. They didn't, you know, what did sequoia forests do in the days before Indians were in the Yosemite Valley? How did they survive there? I mean, it's just an absurdity to suggest that they needed humans to be setting fires there. You know, there's enough fire happening from other sources, and over when you're looking at things from a century by century perspective, and that's the time frame you need. Sequoias live thousands of years. They only need one big fire once every couple of thousand years to sustain themselves.
So the less vegetation we have, the more vegetation management we have. That doesn't make sense, and yet that's the pattern that we're taking. George, I have an observation. You are able to spout out all this valuable information when you're on here on a whim because you studied this information, not because you're 250 years old and lived through it. My point is, Sierra Club and all these other people have access to the same information that you have, but they're not including it and they're not sharing it. This is intentional omission to achieve a different goal, in my opinion. Is that fair for me to conclude that?
Yes, it is. And you could even argue that in some cases, the conservation groups are utilizing Native American stuff, philosophy, or whatever you want to say, ideas to further their goals, exploiting that kind of thing.
Which is what I call red washing. It's exactly what I call that exploitation. I call that red washing, just to be inflammatory, to get people to like, what do you mean? How are you daring? Are you insulting Native Americans? No, I'm insulting the institutions you just mentioned that exploit Native American traditional ecological knowledge, which certainly they had, but it's not applied post-industrial revolution with 340 million Americans living on a planet, a continent. I'll stick with the North America that's been basically devegetated, and so much of its wildlife originally has been slaughtered and destroyed.
I'll give you one more example of the inconsistencies. You constantly hear that Native Americans support salmon recovery. And, there are various reasons why salmon have declined, a whole lot of things. But one of the things that almost all fishery biologists agree on is hatchery fish are bad for wild salmon. So if you're for wild salmon, you should be opposed to hatcheries. Yet there are numerous tribes that have opposed the closing of hatcheries, or they operate hatcheries of their own to sustain salmon runs, because in some cases they can capture the fish and sell them. But for whatever reason, if you're really for wild salmon, you wouldn't be supporting hatcheries whatsoever. And there's a lot of tribes in the West that support having more hatchery production.
Would you briefly explain why hatchery salmon are not the same as wild salmon breeding on their
own?
Oh
yeah, well, they're domesticated. They often transfer disease to wild fish. They compete with wild fish, but they're not as competitive. So they're occupying the same habitat. They breed with the wild fish, and reduce their genetic diversity. I'll give you an example. Everybody knows about how the dams were taken out, or a lot of people know about dams taken out in Olympic National Park and the restoration of the Elwha River. And part of that taking out the dams was to try to reestablish wild fish runs in the river, which there were still remnant fish runs below the dams. And the Elwha tribe opposed, I don't know if they opposed, what they supported was creating a hatchery at the mouth of it to increase salmon runs up the Elwha River. The National Park Service was against that because they wanted wild salmon there. And yet the Elwha tribe got their hatchery as part of the whole, quote, restoration process. And this gets back to the conservation groups. Most conservation groups don't ever point out this inconsistency when they talk about the Elwha restoration.
Is that the same with bison as well? The bison herds now, I think you said the one in Yellowstone, although it's not a wild herd, is wilder than a lot of the kind of semi-domesticated, livestocky converted herds of bison that exist. Is that right?
Yeah, because in Yellowstone, they're still subject to harsh winters. They have predators still going after them. They're still able to move around to a degree until they get to the park border where the lead fence exists. I'm being facetious, bullets. So they operate at the herd in Yellowstone operates under more natural conditions than any other herds that I'm aware of in the lower 48 states. It's just an example. I can't say that they don't have, because of the hunting and other things that are going on, they're still being affected, but they're less domesticated than other herds.
And didn't you just write an article pushing or advocating for the expansion of borders around Yellowstone for just this purpose, to help bison as well as other wild animals?
Exactly. If the borders of Yellowstone were expanded, because there would be no hunting in theory in the park, that would allow bison herds numbers to increase as they occupy more of the surrounding area without being slaughtered immediately. And at some point, I might even accept some tribal hunting on public lands, but not this sort of shooting thing right at the borders as the animals come out. And also after bison herd numbers expand to a point where their genetic diversity is sustained and their influence on the landscape is maintained. And, so I'm saying we should protect the whole greater Yellowstone ecosystem, about 20 million acres is a rough number, because there's no place, temperate zone around the world where we have that opportunity left, except in this one place. And it's, Yellowstone is of global significance, the ecosystem is of global significance. So if we could expand the borders and put it all under National Park Service management, which has its own problems, as you know, from Point Reyes and so forth, but still, the Park Service in general's tendency is to operate and favor natural ecological conditions and functioning. So
and that's the other big. Thank you, George. That's the other big bias that's baked in, is like, we will be criticized, I promise you, as you gentlemen know, for being colonialists who think that the wilderness is something that a white man can do and the Native American. No, we're not saying that. We're saying we want to preserve areas of the country that were the way they were over 400 years ago, when Native Americans lived in the land and didn't control everything with a giant population of industrialized tools the way this current white man culture wants to do. And to the extent that they can coerce, bribe, corrupt Native American peoples, corruption is an equal opportunity force. Money corrupts anybody and everybody, and it can happen with Native American peoples too.
There is a tendency by supporters of, and mostly I see them in the academics and the humanities, of this gardening the planet, and they use this straw man. Oh, us conservationists are so ignorant. We didn't know there were people out there on the landscape doing things. I mean, it's just absurd. Like when Yellowstone was established, I've had people write about Yellowstone. Oh, they didn't realize that Indians lived in and around Yellowstone. Oh, yeah, they knew it. They'd get their scalp taken off if they weren't cautious about traveling through the countryside there. It's just an absurdity. But the fact is they still had minimum impact, and they weren't occupying, a large part of the landscape. There were lots of places in North America, just as there are today, where there's lower demographic. I mean, you can go to the middle of Nevada and there's not a whole lot of people in parts of that, or parts of Alaska. I can go to lots of places and say that the human impact is less than compared to, say, LA or San Francisco. So there's a definite gradient there of human influence even today. And it was certainly even greater difference back in the day when low population densities existed across North America. So, it's absurd to suggest that there was no place that was self-willed land. That's the way we, or people like me, define what wilderness and national parks and preserves should be, where natural processes, and when I say natural, I'm excluding humans, because a lot of these landscapes existed for millions of years without human influence, and they can still operate without human influence. They don't need humans to be healthy. They don't need humans to survive. And that's just a arrogance of people today, of the anthropocentric viewpoint, that somehow the world can't survive without human manipulation. I just think that's a third idea.
The mean version of that is that, in fact, things will only improve without us. That's my take.
In today's world, probably true. Yes,
well,
we certainly need to expand across a lot of America. I mean, all you got to do is fly over the center part of this country, and all you see is fields. The impact of agriculture has been tremendous on the landscape, and we have limited areas where we can actually allow the idea of self-willed land to the degree possible, like you mentioned at the very beginning. That doesn't mean I want to see wildfire burn down your house, but there's ways that you can do things to protect your house and keep it from burning down that you could implement that make it unnecessary to worry about wildfires burning down your house.
Protect your house with home hardening and defensible space.
Right.
Don't cut down the forest. And
exactly.
That's so obvious and so simple a notion. It is chilling to me that lots of people that look like us, retired architects, doctors, bankers, lawyers, self-described environmentalists, live in Inverness and Point Reyes Station and other Tony places in West Marin, and just refuse to grok that. And they want to thin, cut down, manage the forest. It just makes me crazy.
Well, there's a whole thing with getting back to a number of points. I'm going to talk about the managing the forest thing. One, when you open up the forest, by thinning, you dry out the landscape and the soils, which increases its flammability. And the other major thing in all wildfires is wind. And so when you hear about wildfires being out of control, there always has wind as an element. And of course, you thin the forest, makes it easier for wind to penetrate and carry embers further and so forth. And the other part of the whole thinning process is they go in there and they take 50% of the trees out. They don't know which trees have genetic resistance to drought or insects or whatever. And they're saying, we're making the forest healthier. You have no idea which trees are the ones that are going to be the needed genetic factors in the future, especially with changing climate.
Our hubris is only outshined by our ignorance.
Exactly.
This link is the interview I did with George on my Angry Ecologist channel. But that one one of the things I remember from that was maternal instincts disappearing if you are hunting the wrong animals, the wrong bison, like things that most of us would never even think about. It's like, oh, you're not passing on genetic information or even instinctual information or maternal behavior when you start to domesticate these bison. And someone in the chats asked if Trump is messing with Yellowstone. I saw that bison are being pushed off of more land for more cattle grazing. I can't remember where it was, but George, you can probably speak on it.
Yeah. Well, it has to do with a controversy in Montana. There's an organization called the American Prairie Preserve who has been buying land from willing sellers, i.e. other ranchers in the central Montana, and creating a large preserve where they want to graze bison on the preserve. And people have to understand that in the Western United States, if you own private land, in a lot of parts of the West, there are associated grazing privileges, not rights, privileges to graze on public land adjacent to those ranches and attached to those ranches. So when the American Prairie Reserve was buying up some of these private ranches, they were getting BLM allotments associated with the ranch, and they wanted to graze bison on it. And the BLM approved that about a year or so ago. In other words, that bison could be grazed on these lands, and the Trump administration has reversed that and say no bison on public lands to graze there.
When the allotment benefited private landholders who were grazing cattle, there was no problem. But then people started buying private land for rewilding, and now that adjacent allotment is no bueno, because you can't help wildlife, you can only help cattle.
Exactly. In fact, they made the new grazing regulations that the BLM is implementing. There is a comment period right now, but one of the things in there is a lot of bad things. But one of them says that only productive animal production is allowed to be done on public lands, which of course means only domestic livestock would be permitted. And that's a direct attack on the American Prairie Reserve attempt, as well as others. Now, those bison at the American prairies are not wild either. They're domesticated, they're fenced in and so forth. But their goal is to create an area that's about 3 million acres, which is about 1.5 times the size of Yellowstone, which would be getting to the size where bison could be largely wild and unmanipulated as well. But there are ways from that.
George, would you move just a little bit closer to the camera still? I see we've kind of poked the bear and gotten you up, so now your head is about the same size as ours, because this is going to be the snapshot I'm going to use after the show to promote this show, to get more people to watch it. You can move around now. I just needed one freeze frame. If you want to do the Skyward thing, that's fine. But I really value this, and Skyward, I just want to have a little tete-a-tete with you. It's 11:07. We're over an hour. We could easily do another hour with this gentleman. And I'm not sure whether keeping it shorter is better and then begging George back, and we won't overstay our welcome with him.
Well, let me do a plug for tomorrow. I have Randall Plunkett coming back on tomorrow to talk about forests being allowed to manage themselves. We actually have a place where we're witnessing somebody allowing a forest to manage itself and sitting back and letting nature be the teacher. So everyone, because he's in Ireland, it's going to be at 8 a.m. Pacific tomorrow. But I'm continuing my series with Randall Plunkett. George, if you want to listen in or chime in, I bet you would find it fascinating. But before people tune out, since we're over an hour, I want to remind everyone to come back tomorrow morning.
And also, next week on our show, we will not have the great George Werthner, but I'm going to beg him to come back another time, if he would, on whatever topic is pertinent. We have the THEE Owl Queen, Heather King, who is a wildlife photographer living in Canada, and she's focused on the barred owl, and we're going to talk about the barred. Well, basically, I want to focus on her love of the owls and get people to care about the barred owl, which is now being cast as an, air quotes again, invasive species that needs to be slaughtered by intelligent human white guy managers to protect the poor little spotted owl. And there's so much wrong with that. And George is smiling, that smile of wisdom. He knows what I'm talking about. But we're going to have that's next Tuesday at our 10 a.m. show.
That's for sure.
So this is our little bit of housekeeping, George. Might you come back for some other topic with us if we can?
I'd be happy to. I actually can't stay on much longer today because I have a friend showing up at any moment here, and I'll have to visit with her when she arrives. So anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you, George Worthner. Folks, please subscribe to the Wilderness News.
The Wildlife News.
Sorry.
Wildlife News.
Oh, my God. Thank you. The Wildlife News, not the Wilderness Society, the Wildlife News. George is a frequent contributor. I'm going to put that in my next newsletter, as well as do a screen snapshot of us three dudes here so that people watch the content of this show. If we keep it shorter, when people see a 2-hour video, they tend to run away, understandably, because that's a ton of content. But really appreciate your participating, George, and your lifetime of work for the wilderness and wild earth and wild animals, which you care so obviously deeply about.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to cut out now at this point then. All right. Yeah. See you.
I appreciate it.
So I think we are good, Skyward. It's a good enough stopping point. Is that correct?
Sure. I bet we barely touched on what you had prepared, but that's normal, right?
That's fine. As I knew we would for a topic, and I do like kind of working into it, but I didn't know that we'd have George. So thank you for having a connection to him and inviting him on and him accepting. Fantastic. I wanted to talk about the whole 30% of the planet should be rewilded, or 50% is what us wilderness advocates want, which is less human development and less tending and less managing everywhere.
You know, during the Obama administration, there was a goal to leave 3% of the ocean alone, not rape it. And we couldn't get to that. And now Trump's in office. What percent do you think there is?
Well, this is, as I like to call it,
achieve 3%, man.
This is end stage capitalism, where just all the shackles are off and it just rapaciously extracts everything it can, so much so that even the yahoos who don't follow the news and are working 3 jobs and can't pay attention to what's happened say, hey, wait a second, groceries are more expensive, the air is dirtier, the regulations are off, gas is more expensive. Like, this is not working for me. I thought it was all going to get better. Elon Musk wasn't telling the truth. The Trump administration wasn't telling the truth. His entire administration is saying the opposite of what's happening out of an Orwell book. Yeah, folks, capitalism without restraint.
I noticed that you relieved your white guilt multiple times in the show. So now it's my turn regarding us criticizing Native Americans.
It's not guilt, buddy. You got that wrong. It's not guilt.
Okay,
it's covering our ass for the criticism, which is coming. You listen carefully. We don't hate Native Americans at all.
That's my turn. I go after people that I have expectations for and feel disappointment for. Most people I have zero expectations for, which is sad, but that's reality. Now, you want to bring some Native Americans on here who still actually believe in cultural traditions and not using their cultural stance to help Whitey further exploit the planet. Come on and talk about it. Please. No, I'm not going to blindly applaud people who are being used as pawns to further destruction of the planet.
Well, of course. Absolutely, Skyward, but it's not 100%. Not all Whitey is bad and not all Native Americans are bad. Not all of them are corrupted. Not all Whitey is corrupted. I mean, it's just, people are people. That's my basic. People
we're all people and we're all corruptible.
Right. And we all are capable of great good and decency. It just depends where our leaders start pulling us and with what technologies and blah, blah, blah. Information. That's why I'm hoping more people watch the show. I wanted to keep it kind of compact. So there's really good content. I'm really pleased, Skyward. It's a pleasure to do this with you. And thanks for getting George again. Just really important talk.
Yeah. Thank you to George. One more visual that I thought you'd love before we close that I didn't show. There's our forest manager, and there's a hawk or something that's so pleased with his management that he's sitting on his hand.
Like the falconer controlling the animal.
Thank you for chopping down my home.
Right. Look how the trees are nice, openly spaced. It's so nice and park-like.
Perfect.
Oh boy.
Absolutely no underbrush for any other species to exist in that image, by the way.
I think it's why people like redwood forest. You know, they're relatively little ground cover, and we can start fires and clear them out more to clean them up so they look like a, Golden Gate Park, a wonderful man-made park, but completely controlled.
Okay, on Honest Doubter, you're a little late with your comments. But go ahead, Jack.
Inasmuch as Native Americans had a barter and local subsistence culture, that much they were actually better stewards. Of course, there's violence and bad actors within, but I think that's fair. I agree. Yeah. I mean, overall, and there was far fewer of them in pre-industrial, as George Werthner hit the nail on the head. So yes, honest doubter.
Right. I mean, they could have been absolutely terrible stewards of the land, but if there were only thousands of them, it's not the same impact.
Well, and to his point, a barter system, not a, hey, let's accumulate wealth by pulling stuff off the land and turning it into piles of money or gold or Bitcoin, whatever the commodity is that you can't eat, dress yourself with, or live under to shelter yourself from the weather. Yeah, we're insane.
I'd like to know when the conversation amongst the ancient Native Americans was, look at these trees. I wonder if we could chop them down and sell them.
Aren't these magnificent? Let's kill some more. Look at that beautiful animal. Let's shoot it out of the sky. By the way, just to show you, Skyward, there's a comment here from John August. As usual, great show. So he's a regular watcher who's not the extrovert we are, but we have many people like that who do, oh, I love your show, or I've watched your show and I really enjoy it. So I'm just encouraged that we can get more viewers and get more great content here. God knows we have more people to bring in as guests. I'd love to have a show with you, me, George, Ken Brower, and Rick Halsey of the Chaparral Institute, a meeting of the minds, even though they're all white men like me, or middle-aged white men. Just really, we have access to some great people. Yeah. We need more. Well, honest doubter, do you know about sodium batteries? I assume you do, which are going to hopefully replace lithium. That's one where I'm actually kind of naive like the tech bros and think technology can actually get us out of the hole we dug with technology. Okay.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Skylar, a pleasure. Thanks, man. See you next week, and see you tomorrow at 8 a.m. Pacific time.
8 a.m. Are you going to be able to get up for that?
I don't know. I did. Ray Cooper, hey, Ray, gave me Randall's book, which I've been reading at bed at night rather than watching some late night TV or something. And wow, I mean, especially because he's describing parts of New York City, my home, that I know well. So really enjoying the read of Wild Thing by Randall Plunkett, who is Skylar's guest tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Wednesday. Okay.
All right.
Bye now.